On the last episode of DS9, Plain Simple Garak's shop got a little bit kaboomed. The initial investigation suggested an assassination attempt from a visitor to the station, who himself was then kaboomed by Romulans. These same Romulans denied having any involvement with the attempt on Plain Simple Garak's life, and said killing the assassin was purely for crimes against them. Odd then that one of Odo's contacts says there have been other Romulan shenanigans afoot around Cardigan Space, along with more former Obsidian Order members doing a dead as well. Plain Simple Garak might have gone the same way had he not seen the would-be assassin arrive and blown up his own shop to make a genuine attempt on his life too risky. Plain Simple Garak thinks the best person to ask why all of this is happening is Tain, former head of the Obsidian Order and one of the most underhanded gits who ever lived. Except he's not at home according to his housekeeper, and she makes Plain Simple Garak swear to find Tain and help him. All of which leads them to a secret hideout of Tain, though apparently not that secret as there's a Romulan warbird already here. The reason is because Tain is on it, and he's on it because the Cardigan Obsidian Order and Romulan Tal Shiar have built a joint fleet to go and kick the Dominion right in the bollocks. To be specific, they're off to do a genocide on the Founders and render the entire rest of the Dominion impotent as a result. And Plain Simple Garak chasing after Tain to make sure he's alright, despite Tain being the one who exiled him in the first place, has earned him an offer to rejoin the Obsidian Order and take his place by Tain's side once more. It's certainly an upgrade from the assassin Tain sent after him to make sure he wouldn't be a problem when Tain takes over the Order again. Let's see how everything works out for all involved. Bashir is having lunch with O'Brien, though he's discovering it's not quite the same as his usual dining partner. O'Brien is a simple man of simple tastes, and is of the peculiar opinion that meals are for eating instead of debate. News of his regular lunch partner is thin on the ground, search crews looking for the mega shuttle having found nothing yet, though it looks like something's starting to kick off up in ops. Some unusual wibblies outside reveal themselves to be cloaked ships, but not just Romulan ones. Cisco expects a fight, but one doesn't come. Instead, the ships pop through the wormhole, leaving Cisco to call Starfleet and let them know that shit might be kicking off in the Gamma Quadrant. While the Federation prepares for conflict, Tain and Plain Simple Garak are getting over theirs. Some reminiscing is followed by a chat on who they'd like to have killed, all of which is interrupted by the arrival of a Romulan officer. Lovok here has come to tell Tain that we're on our way to the Founder's homeworld at medium warp, a precaution to avoid being spotted while cloaked like the Defiant was, and that Odo is safely locked away behind some force fields. That latter comment may have been engineered by Tain. See, Odo might know things that are useful, and Plain Simple Garak used to be so very good at interrogation, so his first job as a newly reminted member of the Obsidian Order is to make him talk. That's going to be a challenge, as the only thing Odo has to tell him is that he should eat a big barrel of dicks. Plain Simple Garak tries the diplomatic approach and explains that anything he shares on the Founders could be instrumental in protecting everybody in the Alpha Quadrant. Odo's not interested and tries again to convince him that Tain is the problem he should be focusing on. Perhaps it's just an attempt to drive a wedge, but I think Odo's smart enough to realize that someone like Tain isn't the sort of person to get over a betrayal, regardless of whether it really happened. Back on DS9, we're watching a video of Tain explaining that what he's doing is for the good of all. Well, except the people on the other end of the genocide, obviously, but, omelettes and eggs. A Starfleet admiral appears and tells Cisco that the Romulans received something similar from one of their people, which at least gives both sides plausible deniability for what's going on. Both governments are saying they're looking at ways to stop it, but that activity isn't particularly energetic, as there's a fair chance Tain could pull it off. Why stop something useful when you're not getting the blame? That seems to be an opinion shared by Starfleet. We can't condone it, obviously, but we're not involved, so, fuck 'em. What we can do is prepare for the aftermath. The Jem'Hadar won't be a problem once the drug they rely on runs out, as the Founders are the only ones who make it, but that still gives them time to come through the wormhole and take their frustration out on us. That's also why Cisco's being told he can't go after the fleet to see if they nabbed Odo, despite receiving part of a distress call before their mega shuttle disappeared.
Cisco's Starfleet, though, and Starfleet means ignoring the orders you don't like. There are reinforcements on the way after all, so the Defiant won't be missed. Eddington, the security guy who's been conspicuously absent for a lot of episodes, doesn't like the idea of going against an admiral's orders, but bollocks to him, we're doing it anyway, albeit on a voluntary basis. Those volunteers just happen to coincide with the main cast, though it looks like Eddington's changed his mind and decided to join them. Another call from the Admiral suggests somebody's let him know what's going on, so Sisko simply ignores it and buggers off anyway. Lovok is giving a progress report on their plan. The Founder's homeworld is far enough away from help that we'll have plenty of time to nuke it until it's just a ball of molten rock. That's assuming they don't have a trick up their sleeves, and the best way to know that is to make Odo talk. Tain has some doubts about plain simple Garak getting the job done, or at least says he does in order to make him try harder. And there's a new toy that might help, a gizmo that prevents changelings from altering their shape. Well, probably, anyway, they've not actually had a chance to test it yet. Over on the Defiant, we're having a few technical problems. A sneaky bastard mode just stopped working, and that means we've got a giant target painted on us. O'Brien can't figure out the reason why, but Eddington is able to help. After all, he's the one who sabotaged it. The Admiral gave him very specific instructions to prevent any rescue attempt, and Eddington thought this was the best way. They can still scarp her, but repairing the cloak will take hours. Lucky we've got O'Brien then, and Sisko sends him off with an understanding to make it very quick indeed. He also lets Eddington stay on the bridge after he gives his word that he'll follow Sisko's orders, now that his commitment to the Admiral has been fulfilled. Hell of a choice, but perhaps self-preservation might make him more inclined to cooperate, now he knows Sisko has no intention of turning around. Back to the flagship we go, and plain simple Garak's having another pop at interrogation. Odo's a bit concerned when he discovers the new gizmo stops him from changing shape, not least of which because it's getting close to his regeneration time, but tries to convince plain simple Garak there's nothing he doesn't already know. The problem with that is they're so alike that he knows there's something Odo's holding back. After all, it's what he'd do. A little later on, we learn that being physically unable to change shape is having a distinctly unpleasant effect on Odo. He's giving as good as he's getting, though, making plain simple Garak choke on what he's doing. And it's working, too. Plain simple Garak pleads with him to say something, even to lie to him, just so he can stop. Maybe seeing that he's broken through makes Odo stop fighting it and tell him that he wants to go home. Not to DS9, but to the planet of his species. He may have forsaken them, but they're still his people. That is his secret. Plain simple Garak disables the device and allows Odo to rest, before burying his head in his hands. O'Brien has proven his usefulness again, and sneaky bastard mode on the Defiant is working once more. Sisko decides to put his foot down, and off we go as fast as we can in the general direction of the Founder's homeworld. Back on the Romulan warbird, Anabran Tain is receiving bad news. Plain simple Garak has finished interrogating Odo, and regrets to admit that he was unable to learn anything at all from him. Not a peep. That makes Odo useless, thinks Tain, though plain simple Garak argues against his execution. He's an official from Bajor after all, and his death might be diplomatically difficult. Lovok agrees, though for different reasons. There may be Founders elsewhere, so having one to study might help detect them. Tain likes that argument better and agrees to give Odo to the Romulans before leaving for the bridge, as we're about to arrive at our destination. Lovok stops plain simple Garak on the way to ask why he was protecting Odo, and his denials don't work. He'll have to deal with suspicion from Tain and Lovok from now on. That'll have to wait, though, as we've got a planet to kaboom. The initial bombardment buggers up a third of the surface, though makes no effect on the life signs they're reading. That's because the readings are fake and there's nobody on the planet, which would also explain the bloody great big Jem'Hadar fleet that just arrived. Things go very badly indeed for the Cardigans and Romulans, and scarpering isn't an option. Lovok goes off to engineering after some kabooms to try and get things working, and plain simple Garak decides he's got somewhere else to be as well. The somewhere is Odo's prison, and he knocks out the guard in front, then nicks his gun. If Odo's displeased to see him, he has the good sense to realise that now's not really the time for an argument, and agrees to bugger off in the mega shuttle. Lovok appearing at the door looks like the end of that plan, only for him to hand over a gizmo and say it's needed to access their ship. After all, Lovok can't hurt Odo, because no changeling has ever harmed another. Lovok's a founder plant, you see, and tells us they heard about Tain's plan and encouraged it so they could ambush the fleet and destroy it. The Obsidian Order and Tal Shiar will cease to be a threat as a result. He also offers to let Odo join him and come back to the Founders, but Odo again declines. Lovok teleports away, leaving Plain Simple Garak and Odo to Scarpa. Or not, as Plain Simple Garak is instead going to the bridge and asks Odo to wait for as long as possible before taking off. He wants to rescue Inabran Tain, if he can. But he can't. Tain is broken, this disaster evidence to him that he's no longer the mastermind he once was. Trying to plead with him has no effect on Tain, but it does stop Plain Simple Garak from noticing Odo sneak up behind him and knock him out. We rejoin him tending a black eye on the megashuttle as they start getting shot at by Jem'Hadar. Things looking decidedly dicey causes Plain Simple Garak to apologize to Odo for what he did, and Odo to admit that he understands Plain Simple Garak's motivations. That makes it a great time for the Defiant to appear and save them, which it promptly does. They're teleported aboard, so that's another megashuttle down the shitter, and we all leg it back to the station as fast as we can. Time for the aftermath, and in true Starfleet fashion, we're going to hush it all up and pretend nothing happened. I suppose that's easier than the Admiral having to explain why he ordered the sabotage of a Starfleet ship. Pretending things didn't happen is a theme with Plain Simple Garak too, and Odo thanks him for not mentioning to anybody, including Sisko, what he said about wanting to go home. That leaves the matter of this shop, and Odo suggests he should reopen it. That his return to Cardassia died with Inabran Tain goes unsaid. Maybe there are other things to say though, and Odo suggests he and Plain Simple Garak should have breakfast together at some point, so we'll leave him to consider having gained a new dining partner until the next adventure. Battle is joined between the Dominion and some members of the Alpha Quadrant Club, and the result is decidedly pear-shaped for the away side. This episode's actions render the Obsidian Order and Tal Shiar impotent, or at least significantly weakened. The Founders seem to think this eliminates the Cardigans and Romulans as opposition entirely, which suggests they either see pure military force as no threat in itself, or believe that force won't be used after what they just did. Is that because they think they've created enough fear, or because they believe intelligence services carry the most power? That latter idea certainly ties into their own organizational structure, the Founders themselves being the only ones who can see all the cards in play throughout the entire Dominion. But they must know that's not the same for every species, though, surely. Is it really possible they've misunderstood the power structure on Cardassia, the Central Command being just as powerful as the Obsidian Order was before the battle? Or do they consider the Cardigans a spent force because they already have something in place for them? Speaking of which, that something may be hinted at during the episode. Colonel Lovok is a Founder spy who managed to infiltrate the Tal Shiar, manipulating efforts by Alpha Quadrant powers to combat the Dominion. It's not the first example we've had of perfect mimicry by a changeling. We've already seen that Founders can be more effective than Odo in emulating Alpha Quadrant humanoids, Odetta having copied Kira previously, but this is the first indication of that being a more widespread approach. Except, not necessarily. At no point in the episode are we told that Lovok was a Founder spy when Tain first cooked up the plan, so they could simply be replacing people who become useful, rather than planting sleeper agents far and wide to see what they catch. A single confirmed spy can be just as effective as many when it comes to organizations panicking about the possibility of having been compromised. That said, replacing high-ranking officials is certainly the most logical choice. There are no listening devices to be found or the need to intercept intelligence when your enemies are delivering data straight to one of your own people. Needing to revert to liquid form might be a problem, but nobody would bat an eyelid at a senior intelligence official being a bit secretive now and again. If they have the Founders to spare, infiltration at senior levels makes a lot of sense. And that's possibly hinted at elsewhere, Lovok saying the only threat our side of the wormhole offers now is the Klingons and the Federation, but perhaps not for long. Tangentially, you'll note the Ferengi aren't mentioned, likely due to the Founders knowing they won't care who they're doing business with as long as they're left to it. That might cause some problems further down the road if the Dominion tries to be a bit too forceful about things, as I'd expect the Ferengi to know which withheld trade goods can bring whole planets to their knees, but somebody like Grand Nagus Zek would happily put up with a little bowing and scraping in order to access a market the size of the Dominion. Anyway, the line about the Klingons and Federation certainly suggests things are already afoot. We could ask why that comment was made, as all it does is tip off those involved, but treating solids with contempt would certainly fit what we've learned to date, or perhaps having the Federation and Klingons chasing shadows serves their purposes. Regardless, the episode and its implications leave us with clear evidence that the Dominion, although silent, has not been resting on its laurels with regards to us. Just a couple of bits about Odo and plain simple Garak to note before we end then. The first is learning that Odo wishes to return to his people despite turning them down twice now on ethical grounds. At least, that's what he said anyway. We can't ignore that this comment is perfectly pitched to plug straight into something plain simple Garak feels on a personal level and the effect that would have on him in the moment. That doesn't mean it's not true as well, but it's exactly the right answer to make plain simple Garak see him as more than an assignment. Odo is both smart enough and a sufficient observer of humanoid behaviour to understand the effect it would have had. The last noteworthy point is that plain simple Garak is still capable of performing atrocities even if he hates himself as he does so. It's important to note that this isn't the same as just being evil. There are calculations behind those choices, and he's able to correct his course. Sometimes that seems contradictory, as it did with torturing information from Odo, then choosing not to pass it on, but there was logic behind those decisions. His loyalty to Inabran Tain and desire to return home forced him to interrogate Odo. His respect for Odo and understanding of the secret he carried made him decide to lie about it, despite knowing this would cause suspicion in Tain. If that sounds familiar, you might be remembering an episode where Odo was employed by the Cardigans to find a murderer, then chose to keep his mouth shut when he learned about some terrorism. Both Odo and plain simple Garak operate by the rules they have in their own heads, regardless of the consequences, and that makes it easier for them to respect each other, even if they disagree on the rules themselves. End of episode.
Well, that's the latinum gone then.
I told you Odo was on the take.
We can always find something incriminating and blackmail him.
What an excellent idea. We should definitely make an enemy of the man who can turn into knives. This course of action would have no consequences at all.
Alright, no need to be a dick about it. I didn't take your money. It's a shame we didn't find out where he puts it.
Maybe he doesn't have a place. Maybe he keeps it stored inside himself.
Money in the stomach? That's a stupid idea. Nobody'd do that.
Fair point. This all leaves us with having to find another way of getting the security footage, though.
As if it even exists. Hey, there are days when I miss the simplicity of just trying to get Tom Paris killed.
Imagine how the guy who writes these feels. Woof.